all good now. Cool. So I'll just intro us. We are the Homie and the Dude podcast. This is episode 5. We're greeted today with the wise and masterful Daniel Ingram. It's such a pleasure to have you today.
Great to be here.
Yeah, man. It's really nice to have you here. We've been looking forward to this one, like I said to you before we hopped on live. And we've been looking forward to it for a really long while now. And you were actually one of the first people we said that we were going to get on. We were like, we've got to get Daniel on because he's going to be amazing. Couple of things that I've just got to quickly address before we do get into the podcast. The first one is sometimes there might be some taboo language and some topics that some people might not appreciate on this podcast. If that isn't for you, you can check out at any point. That is perfectly fine. We appreciate that and understand. As well as that, a big thank you that I just want to spread out to the world, the people that are watching this, anyone who watches this at a later date that isn't when it's live. Thank you so much. In 1 week, we have reached over 100 followers on Facebook, which is absolutely incredible. We can't thank you guys enough because every single one of those follows and likes gets us closer to goals that we have that allow us to create more content, better content, have more incredible guests like Daniel on, so on and so forth. So if you're watching this and you are currently liked and subscribed to the YouTube channel and the Facebook page, please share it out to your friends, whether that be on social media or by word of mouth. As well as that, if you're watching this and you're not currently someone who is liking the page or following on Facebook or subscribed on YouTube, please go do that. It's only a couple of seconds, couple of clicks, 3 at max in most cases, and it's a world of support for us. So thank you so much for everyone who has done that. We really appreciate it. Me and Tom have been so psyched about hitting that 100 number. It was our first milestone that we wanted to really hit, and we're really appreciative of that.
You're here. You're here.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. So let's get into this. Daniel, obviously, from what I know of you, Tom knows you a bit better than me. You guys have hung out a bit more and spent a bit more time. For me, the vague idea that I had of you before we met and the idea that Tom presented is that you are a person who has achieved a lot within the world of meditation, particularly within the insight pathway, which Tom told me a little bit about. And I'm really interested actually more on, before we get into that, what's your daily routine? Like what does someone who has achieved so much within meditation, and what would you get up to on a day-to-day basis? Maybe not in COVID times and during COVID times. Give us a picture of both.
You mean like with regard to meditation or just my life? Like how's my day?
Just your day-to-day life. What does someone who's achieved so much within meditation do during their day? Like what's your day-to-day?
I look very normal, I think, for a lot of people. I retired 2 years ago, which was nice, but then I work all day, as my wife will definitely tell you. And so my alarm goes off at 8:15 every day, and I get up within a few minutes, and I usually have, brush my teeth and get some breakfast, usually a little bit of granola and maybe some pecans and fruit. And then I usually start taking calls and or working. So I'm working on a huge project where I'm attempting to bring awareness of spiritual experiences to the world of medicine, particularly emergency medicine and emergency psychiatry. And usually I just start right in with that. Often it's not uncommon for me to have calls, usually starting around 9 or 10, something like that in the morning. And I take usually a few calls a day. That might be networking. That might be coordinating with a researcher. That might be coordinating with someone who knows the world of funding and philanthropy, who can tell me something about, like, for instance, the world of effective altruism, or, other various organizations that might be interested in supporting a project like this. And I also take, somewhere between like 3 and 10 calls a week by people who are having issues related to meditation. Usually they've run into some of the stranger effects that meditation can produce, the weird spiritual highs, lows, mood changes, perceptual stuff, even magical effects. And often they don't know what to do with that, or they're seeking advice for that. How do they handle that? Or some people looking to just go much deeper in their practice. So I help them answer questions about things and get to hear their experiences. So I get to learn from them too and add to my catalog of the wild and strange things that can happen on the path of meditation and spiritual life in general, because probably a third of the people I talk with these days actually first got into their complicated experiences on psychedelics or something like that. Whether or not you consider MDMA a psychedelic, sort of in that gray zone, for some people, depending on how you think about these things.
Yeah.
And helping them handle or process some of the spiritual journey that may have been activated by those kinds of experiences. And then I just do a lot of grunt work. I do a lot of documentation of meetings. I keep a website updated. I keep my team updated of what I'm doing. I'm trying to write a white paper that explains the whole project. And so I usually work until lunch, and then I have a quick lunch, and then I work all afternoon, and sometimes I do a little bit of gardening or chores around the house or cleaning or just, dishes and stuff. And then about every other day I make dinner. And then usually I hang out with the group here, which is my wife and some other friends who are some very interesting people. We might get to them in a second. And flat earthers and deep shamanic practitioners and stuff. So that's very interesting. And we have some fascinating conversations. Also very into conspiracy theory, which also makes for an interesting set of talks. Yeah. And cryptocurrency. So some of their big things. And then I usually just go back and work. Occasionally I watch some entertainment. Most of the time I just go back and work until about midnight. And then I take a shower and go to bed and do it all again. So that's basically every day.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the reason I kind of wanted to ask you that from me personally is because obviously with the, I guess, achievements that have been recorded in your meditation, people often, I guess, would perceive it as enlightenment or something along that kind of terminology. Now, you can probably correct me in a minute and put me on the right track in terms of my thinking, but for me and for, I assume, a lot of people who assume someone is enlightened would maybe live this monk life where they walk very slowly and, all that kind of stuff, but I think it's important that people know that, it doesn't have to be like that you are, also just a person living in the 21st century with technology and everything else the same as everyone else. And for me, that was something that I think was awesome to find out about you when I met you, actually, was really cool. Like, it was really see how humble and chill you are.
As a wise man once said, wise man walks fast when it is time to walk fast, and walks slow when it is time to walk slow. And thus, his house is in order and his mind is at ease.
Nice. Perfect.
Nice. That sounds a little bit like. Did you ever watch the show Kung Fu, where there was
it's that kind of right. Yeah. I'm obviously playing to that sort of stereotypical accent and presentation, but still, it's kind of funny when I.
100%. No. Thank you for answering.
And there's wisdom in it, right? So I also meditate, by the way. So usually I meditate either after lunch, for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes a little longer. And then almost always before going to bed, I'll just sit down on my bed before it's time to go to sleep and I meditate, 15, 30 minutes or something, and then I go to sleep. And I also this year, as Tom knows, did 6 weeks of fire casino retreat. So we were doing, so I've already done 6 weeks of intensive meditation retreat this year with a week in between 2 3-week sections of it. So that was pretty cool. And I actually had planned for 2 more 3-week retreats this year, but those plans have kind of gotten coronavirus, and we may end up doing some kind of home retreat or something, where everybody's sort of virtually meeting. We'll see.
That's cool.
Interesting. Yeah, so just context on that. We spent 3 weeks on retreat, and Tracy, my wife, was also there cooking on that retreat and was sort of displaying her prowess in the vegan cuisine area. And then you're right, we were looking to book this autumn, sort of in October, and who knows, that probably won't happen, but it's still out there to some degree as far as a potential additional retreat. So yeah, the Fire Casino area is something that you talked about early on, and I have been probably slow to getting there, and have experienced it a couple times on a solo retreat and then on a retreat with you, and was 6 other just amazing people just outside of about an hour or so drive outside of Bristol, which was fantastic, on this big estate home, had lots of room and big couches.
Bryngarth,
yeah, it was awesome.
Means hill.
Sounds medieval anyway, doesn't it? No, that's awesome. I like a big part of that is, I think, I wanted at least the people that I know that are watching this to know that you're so down to earth, you're so humble, you're such a chill guy, and that's such an important thing I think that people need to understand about you.
But we are going to put on a bit of a show, I think. I've got a bit of a show for everybody. So we're going to do something that's sort of the opposite of that in some way.
Yeah.
Just for fun.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll see in a second. We'll get there.
So what I want to ask, following like the whole like work thing, what's your job title? What do you like label yourself as? Like, what if someone's like, hey, so what do you do for work? What do you have a job position for yourself?
Yeah, I say that I'm retired, which is as a funny shorthand for working all day. So yeah, I think of myself as a networker, an organizer, and a promoter and fundraiser.
Cool.
So those are the four big things I'm doing right now, as well as I do spend some time in basically spiritual crisis management. So you could call me a spiritual crisis coach or something, because I help people who are undergoing difficult meditation experiences. And I do help run, a website, the Dharma Overground, where people talk about weird experiences. And and so I've got a lot of hats that I wear depending on the moment.
Yeah, that's completely fair enough. That many pies. Um,
Yep.
that's, and I mean, in some cases, that's the way to be. Um, I was going to ask as well, because obviously, I mentioned the whole insight path and everything like that, and we'll get onto that in a second. But something that you brought up that, again, something that not a lot of people know is that there is some weirder experiences that come with meditation.
Yes.
One or two myself, not many, because I don't meditate as heavily as Tom or you do. But I definitely know Tom has had some. There's been times where we've sat and talked for a good couple hours about weird things he's experienced, and I'm trying to like get my head around it and whatnot. So yeah, explain a bit of that to people, because again, I'm not sure how many people know that people perceive meditation as it's this thing that clears your head and helps you out. That there's also sometimes some adverse effects that come from that as well.
Yeah, so very, very simple map theory, because we may start talking map theory. So I'm just going to do as quick a rundown as I can of some meditation stage stuff. So the first insight that people get generally when they sit down on the cushion is that their mind is a mess. That you thought, oh, just sitting there quietly would be so easy. And nobody the first time finds it that way, basically. Everybody sits down and goes, oh my golly, I can't follow 3 breaths in a row. My mind is a chaotic, crazy show of weird urges and strange thoughts and neurotic feelings. And that's pretty much everybody's experience. And maybe there's the rare person who doesn't notice that, but I haven't met them yet. And then but some people can then start to notice thoughts are actually thoughts, which is really cool, right? That you can actually observe thoughts. They're not actually you. It's a stage called mind and body. But then some people will be like, wait, if I'm not my thoughts, who am I? And even those first early insights, which can be so sort of freeing and that you're not so caught in your thoughts, can be confusing for people, or can have the sense of unity or the sense of, wait, maybe the cosmic consciousness is perceiving thoughts, because I always thought maybe thoughts were me, or they were themselves perception or something. So people can get into these interesting experiences even just right out of the gate. And then a lot of people will then get into a stage called cause and effect, where it seems like attention is kind of messing the breath up. If you've ever tried to meditate and you notice that, like, wait a second, when I try to pay attention to the breath or something, it seems to like stop or jerk, or there's something weird. There's this weird cause and effect relationship where attention and movement seems to be doing this sort of strange mechanical thing. Well, that's a stage called cause and effect. It can also cause some weird, as they get further into that, it can cause some like, there may be like sort of weird movement stuff and neck tension and jaw tension and sort of like, people will like find themselves sitting and they're like, is this straight? And like there's these weird perceptual distortions. The body can seem weirdly big or weirdly small. Our lips and hands can feel really large, something called the homunculus, which is where we sort of demap from normal perceptual size. And actually we have so many more nerve receptors in like our face and our hands that they've becoming actually bigger, because we have much bigger areas of our brain that actually map those areas because of all the additional nerves. And so you can get these weird things, and then people can get into some weird shaking. I just talked to somebody yesterday whose wife was having an acupuncture session and actually got into this territory, started having spontaneous vocalizations, was like, and making weird noises, couldn't seem to stop it, and odd body was forming itself into weird postures. And you find people like, suddenly going, and doing these strange gestures, and like, you find this weird stuff happening. Like, and this is the farther end. This doesn't happen to everybody. I'm going to be talking kind of in extremes, but, and then you get into a stage called the arising and passing away, which is most people think of as a spiritual high. It's often called like Kundalini awakening or a peak experience or something. And this can happen in a lot of contexts: during childbirth, on psychedelics, just sometimes for no obvious reason, during shamanic ceremonies or journeying work or meditation retreats, usually about like day 6 or 7 of a Goenka retreat, if someone's heard of a Goenka 10-day meditation retreat, or plenty of other traditions as well. And some people just spontaneously for no reason, as happened to some people I know. And it can involve like powerful perception of like things coming and going, vibrations, energy, staying up for days, super high levels of creativity, bliss and rapture and orgasmic level pleasure pouring through one's body, all kinds of cool experiences. Although for some people, it's not pleasant. They actually just get like a blast of irritating lightning through their spine or something, and it just felt creepy or scary. And so not everybody likes this phase, and why it's pleasant and unpleasant for various people, I don't know. So they can travel out of body, they can see through closed eyelids. It's not uncommon to see a bright white light or sort of complex mandala patterns of bright colors, maybe jewel tones. It can be a very magical phase, creative, sort of sexuality increased, energy increased, visionary stuff increased. So people will suddenly start becoming great philosophers or get all excited about meditation or whatever got them into this phase and want to tell everybody, oh, you've got to try this thing. It's incredible. It will change your life, blah, 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 blah. And so it can be a very high phase. And then soon thereafter is the great spiritual crash into like what's called dissolution, fear, misery, disgust. And not everybody experiences this one that strongly either. It might just be kind of like short, like minutes or seconds, and it might be not that noticeable. But for some number of people, they can like feel their bodies like rotting through the floor, their body is dissolving, or like they don't have control of their mind, or it's creepy or weird, or they might have these creepy images or sudden terror arising for no reason, or suddenly get paranoid or think the meditation has broken their brain or whatever. I was just talking to someone 2 days ago who was talking about how they got into this stage and they thought meditation had permanently broken them, that their mind had now been fractured and they were now mentally ill or something. And it's just a stage that happens where they might feel a lot of grief or disgust with things they used to like. Maybe they were like really into something. All of a sudden they're like, oh, I just don't care about that. Or really into some job or this person or whatever. And then, they get disgusted with relationships, with their meditation teachers, with all kinds of stuff, with their careers, their schooling, and they want to go wander off. So they get this next something called desire for deliverance, where they want to like get out. They feel like they've got to go somewhere. They get sort of claustrophobic. They want to save money so they can go on a retreat, or they've got to like leave this person or this program or this, country or whatever and find the thing. So it can have this sort of weird spiritual questy, but feel to it. And then there's something called reobservation, which is like, I'm just going to stop there. Anyway, it's not a nice stage. And then, but if they can get through that, then they might open up into equanimity, which is like vistas of openness and oneness and connection and togetherness and unitive consciousness and flow states and a profound sense of well-being. And all of a sudden, all the problems that they were all having this big hard time with and in the dark night or, difficult stages, all of a sudden may just seem like whispers of like little, sparkly stuff in the air or something and not really cause any trouble. I'm sort of stylizing, but these are all within the bounds of stuff I've heard people describe to me and stuff I've experienced myself. And then if you go further, you can get into stages of insight. So that was a long explanation, but that just gives you a little bit of the territory.
Yeah, 100%. No, all of that is actually super informative. Like, it's funny, like pieces of that you talked about, I've heard Tom like definitely like give me pieces of that when you've told me about your stuff. And no, it's super, super interesting because in a lot of ways, there's so much good to come from it. But I feel like something that I can relate to from just what you were talking about, it's like there's walls. And in some ways, at least how I was picturing it in when you're talking about it, is that you like come to a wall and you deal with something, whether that be good or bad, you're going to deal with something when it comes to that wall. For me, like the only way I can relate to that, at least in my life, because I haven't done the meditation, is with skateboarding. Every time that I like learn a new trick, it's like that euphoric, like I go away for days feeling like I want to keep skating. Like I suddenly get this new lease of creativity with it as well. And usually what comes right after that is I injure myself. Like the course of it is I feel that I injure myself and go down again. So it's really interesting that I find you have to keep working hard and keep at it. Like the big thing is, no matter what you feel, whether it be a positive or a negative, whether you walk away from a skate session at the end of the day, you have to go back the next day, and irregardless of how bad it is. I guess that's kind of what I got from what you're saying, is that you're going to go through all this stuff, but when you get past it, it's worth the, like, I guess, final result that comes with all this knowledge that you've accrued over this time through your experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I got a question for you, Daniel. And as we were leading into this podcast, I was trying to think of what listeners might want to, or might be thinking at this moment. And so With regard to this aspect of enlightenment, people are curious, right? They really are, wanting to understand what that means. So can you just maybe give us a reference point of how is enlightenment? Because you've been at one point you hadn't completed the path of insight, and now you have. So there's a let's call it insight, fully insight awareness stage, and now there's the post stage that you've been in many, many years. Can you just give us a bit of a comparison on how that looks on a daily basis, like how it's similar or different?
So to most people, I'm going to look pretty ordinary. I mean, I tend to be pretty positive. I have a lot of energy, but that was true in some ways before, not to the same degree. I'm a lot happier now. So it definitely helps reduce some suffering and add some mental clarity and some emotional resilience. There's no question. And I'll to try to bring this down to earth. Okay, I was talking to someone a few days ago, and they had reached some difficult stage of practice. So they had gone through the spiritual high where they were super excited about this app they were using, the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. And they were like, mine had gotten so powerful. And then all of a sudden they felt like they were like disappearing, and they couldn't think, and like they didn't have control of anything. And then they got terrified. So they went through the high stuff and they got to the difficult stuff. They started freaking out, and they thought they were broken, or like they were scared, or they were going to lose control or whatever. And they were having a very hard time relating to their fear. And I said, well, let's do an exercise. And they said, okay. And I said, well, think of like okay, first of all, we're going to take the room as frame, all the experiences in the room, right? So you're sitting in a room and you've got, all these sights, all these sounds, this big volume, and let's hold that sort of evenly in the mind with eyes open as the frame of experience. Now think one of these really scary thoughts you've been having, right? Until you start to feel it in your body, but keep the room as frame. So you've got the sense of while you're thinking these thoughts and having these feelings, you want to notice how big and strong they are in the room, right? What percentage of your experience are those sensations? How strong are they actually? And they said, okay. And, they were like, and sort of starting to close their eyes. I said, no, eyes open, remember the room. And they were like, oh, okay. And I was like, do you have the thought? And they're like, yeah. And do you have the feeling? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, remember the room, right? And they're like, yeah, I can't do it. I can't make the fear stick. It's just disappearing. It's just disappearing. I can't do it right now with holding the room as frame. And I was like, yes.
Like,
right. Exactly. That's the point. That's the point, right? It doesn't work. You can't, because in order to exaggerate our feelings and emotions, we have to sort of do this thing where we activate what's called the default mode network. We activate something called the PCC in our brain, which is the posterior cingulate gyrus. And when we do that, the room kind of disappears for a second, and our thoughts become super big and strong. Whereas if we were holding the room as frame with our PCC very deactivated, our thoughts are these wispy little things in the room. I mean, in comparison to like, physical sensations or colors or whatever, you can barely even find them, right? And so this is basically that just, the vast majority of the time, in other words. Yeah. So whereas most people's default mode network is to have thoughts and feelings be the predominant experience, and the room is there when they need to pay attention to it. They can take a whole shower or drive to work and not even remember any of it. You don't even know if you washed something because you weren't there, you weren't present. Well, if you train to really be present, you can flip over into this other way where it goes, wait a second, when just everything is sort of evenly perceived and thoughts are just these wispy little things, well, then the amount of trouble that all of that used to cause is vastly less. And so that's sort of one example that helps to explain what this experience is like. But in other ways, I'm just an ordinary dude, ordinary mammal, food, hanging out, doing dishes, sweeping the dust bunnies off my floor.
So when you say that you hold the room as frame, as an example, that is your sort of your reality for the most part.
You're grounded.
That's the default, right? So as most people's default is what's called the default mode network, which is internal thoughts, worries, thoughts of past and future, ruminative thoughts. That's where their brain lives if you don't give them something else to do. Well, me, given nothing else to do, the room predominates and thoughts are these wispy little things in it.
Gotcha.
Cool. That's a bloody good way to describe it. Holy shit.
Yeah, I agree.
And they can still convey their message, right? So like, you know, and there might be a little feeling and there are little sensations here or whatever, or, you know, but it's what percent of experience, like this much, right? I mean, it's like, you know, what percentage is this little thing happening here, these little sort of thoughts somewhere here? Like it's almost nothing. So they can convey their message, but they don't become exaggerated. And because they don't become exaggerated, there's not that like constantly re-triggering of all these, you know, adrenaline and cortisol and stress chemicals and stuff in the same way that used to happen before. I mean, what most people do with their emotions is like they may be just walking along in a safe place, but then they remember something that happened to them that was really bad, right? You know, and they get angry about it or something. And then those anger chemicals flood their body, and then they lose touch with the space they're in, and more thoughts come up that are angry. And then those thoughts re-trigger more angry chemicals, and then they get angrier. And then because they don't have this perspective, right? And then they just keep re-triggering the chemicals because the perspective is now lost, sort of amplified by the chemicals that are the angry chemicals or whatever, the angry pathways in the brain or the desirous pathways or the sad pathways or whatever. And so and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And somehow they think this is a good idea. It would almost be like a drunk person who realized they were drunk and then didn't like it, but they just kept drinking, you know, and they just keep slamming them back and getting drunker and, you know, and then just more and more of these sort of things start flooding their brain and they're losing more and more touch with perspective. And yet they just keep knocking them back, you know, and they're, you know, just like, whoa, man, like maybe, you know. And so it's nice to have a brain that has been trained to not do that. You know, it's not like, you know, like continued stimulation can't, you know, cause reactive chemicals. They do, but they're triggered by what's going on in the world in a way that is not like just, you know, sort of the world disappearing, thoughts becoming this huge thing, and then, you know, it's spinning like that. So, and that doesn't mean that I don't feel feelings or that I have perfect intelligence or clarity or anything like that, because I'm still a mammal, but it is much better. It's much better to not have that being caught and stuff be the default mode.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Like, I while you're thinking of that, I was thinking about literally a thought I had today that for like a good hour, I was like, geez, I feel crap about that thought. I feel not so good about that. So no, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting insight that I guess I've been prodding Tom for that insight for ages, but of course he's not there yet, so he couldn't give me that insight, which is beautiful. Exactly. So it's you know, I think that was a perfect way to describe it. I actually, yeah, that clears a lot of questions up for me in terms of how that kind of works and how you're moving about your day-to-day life. It also clears questions up I had about just our interaction when we met each other, Daniel, like in terms of how you just move through space, you know, and how you exist. So
let me just jump in and say that conversation that you and I have, Bodhi, goes something like this. So you're progressing along the path of insight, right, Dad? Yeah, I am. Well, go ahead, levitate. Let's see it. Go ahead, prove it. So where do you go from there? And I mean, it's funny, but there is that perception. There is that perception out there, right? Of like, okay, well, you're enlightened, so that means you're a godly being, and you are able to, you have superpowers, right? So prove it, show us. And it's really tough to navigate through. The way you just explained that, Daniel, is a way to bring it to life on what it really is on a daily basis, as opposed to what it's been described at or promoted as, or in the moment. All right, so should we just go there then?
I was actually going to say, you know, in terms of your activities, Daniel, when we were talking to, you know, your hobbies and whatnot, you said you like to get together with a bunch of guys who I wouldn't know. I don't want to like. Again, I'm try to be politically correct these days. It's something I'm really working on within myself because I'm not the best. But I want to get the correct name. Wizards or
Wizards.
wizards? Not
Sure, wizards is fine.
wizards is fine. Cool. You guys consider yourself wizards and whatnot. I was going to ask actually, do you enjoy practicing that stuff more in groups or more by yourself, as well as also meditation? Because I know you do a lot of both with yourself and with other people. Do you prefer the group dynamic, or are you more of a like you like the internal, like to yourself, no one else in the room kind of thing?
Yeah, I really like both. So I've done solo retreats and group retreats and solo magic and group magic, and I can really appreciate both. They're really different,
Yeah.
right? So they're really different. Particularly, the more different of the two is group magical practice, because it requires a lot more coordination and
Yeah.
people being on very similar pages and mind states and stuff. Whereas when you're doing a group meditation retreat, most of the time you're actually still basically doing what with your eyes closed looks like solo practice, because you're not having to coordinate with other people. So those are a lot closer. Whereas group magical practice is really different, because you have to agree basically ahead of time what ritual is going to do, what tradition that's going to be coming from, what kind of words, who's going to do what role, what's the intention, and obviously everybody's time is valuable. So you have to figure out some spell that's sufficiently satisfying to everyone there that they're all kind of on board with energetically and magically. And you also have to find a group of people with whom you have some sort of magical resonance or fit in terms of personality style, the tradition you like, and your sort of goals for life and energy. And just, yeah. So group magical practice is much harder, and I haven't done nearly as much of it as I've done group magical retreat. And so most of my magical practice is solo.
So within the like you were saying just then that you do a lot of within the groups, you got to make sure everyone fits together and that you're all of the same tradition and doing the same spells. Now,
or even if you're not of the same tradition, that you know enough about the other person's tradition or have enough appreciation of it that you can kind of roll with it. Right?
Okay.
You can get into the spirit of that other vibe or way of working.
So with tradition, just so I'm understanding this correct, are you talking about like traditions as in like shamans versus wizards versus like alchemy?
Yeah, sure.
As in like,
yeah,
there's like, and then there's also like gurus and like, is it like that kind of tradition-y? Like you get people from different sectors of cultural magic? Or is it like you're getting people from the same kind? I'm like, is it pagan magic? Like where's the magic belief coming from, and where do you guys guess is more what I'm questioning?
Well, you find magical beliefs everywhere and in every culture and of large numbers of variety, even within what we might consider one culture. So if you looked at, say, Catholicism, the range of magical beliefs across the range of what Catholicism is gigantic, because it merges with the local animist traditions and saints and things of different countries and cultures as it's moved in. So even if you just tried to limit it to like Catholic magic, you could write, a book this thick, on what even Catholic magic was, even just today, much less historically.
Yeah.
And so, trying to figure out how to categorize magic, there's so, even just within Wicca, there's, all kinds of different strains of it, or within like high magic, there's all these different strains of it, or even within Buddhism, right? There's all these different types of Buddhist magic, and it varies by the country and the practitioner. And even like within Thailand, like northern and southern, and different regions and different teachers, it's all going to look different achans, and so, there's even within like the Golden Dawn or some specific tradition, like you had people arguing and bringing in different magical styles, and some were, like even within a tradition that you think is coherent, actually it isn't, because people have their personal interests and their aspects of it. Someone might like more of the Egyptian stuff or the Hebrew stuff or the, the Western occultist stuff or the Grimoire stuff or Solomonic magic or whatever. Cool. And so you just, it's unfortunately a huge topic, which also makes it part of the fun and richness. It means there's a lot there to choose from.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was like trying to understand. Is there like, of pretty much exactly what you just said. Yeah. That's awesome. So when you guys are practicing, you said as a group you've got to like coordinate and stuff, but when you're doing it by yourself, is that something that, again, you need isolation for? Is it something that you can do with like your missus in the room, or like whoever, like, is it something that you're able to do with other people in the room, or is it something that you have to do by yourself to get that level of focus? I imagine would be like the thing.
Yeah, well, so it really depends on what I'm doing in my mood. I'm very influenced by a tradition called chaos magic, in which kind of anything goes as long as it kind of works and suits your aesthetics.
Okay.
Is a It's a coarse summary, but it's close enough to make some kind of sense. And so you can combine rituals, you can get into one tradition, you can mix stuff, you can make stuff up on the fly, you can make singing a little song into your magical spell.
Mhm.
You can it's very freeing, and some people really thrive in that lack of structure and that just unbounded creativity, and some people don't, but I like it. Although I do sometimes bring in elements of structure, as we'll probably talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
And so having been influenced by some of the more structured traditions as I am, and having grown up with certain associations with some, certain archetypes or certain numbers or certain symbols or whatever have some meaning to me. And so part of chaos magic is also recognizing when things do have resonance for you, well, maybe they've got a little more power there.
Mhm.
And so a spell could be something super simple on the fly that nobody would notice I had even done, just like and that was the whole thing.
Yeah.
That was the whole intention, just kind of, or may not even need to do a movement or make a sound or do anything, just like,
Yeah. Okay.
okay,
So
sending an energy in a direction. And then at other times, I do things that are outrageously formal, that are like you're thinking, with the candles and robes, like I just put on, and very formal ceremony, because that's what just seems like some mix of fun and creative and what seems to be called for at
cool.
some intuitive level.
Cool. So that's so funny. I was about to say, does J.K. Rowling and like Lord of the Rings and all these different fancy worlds that incorporate magic, are they getting it wrong by saying that there's, in certain movies it's cool, they're sorcerers, so the magic is created through elements with their like hands and that kind of thing. Others it's spoken word with a wand, and like Lord of the Rings, it's a lot through song and through things like that. So, it's
Or
uh,
Gandalf's staff, which is another, or rings. Yeah, definitely rings. Yeah.
exactly. So like, is that I'm guessing it's not just one key formula that movies put it under. It's actually so much broader in terms of ways to deliver actual magic.
But actually, even all of those movies have a lot of complexity in their magical tradition. So, like Harry Potter has so many different types of magic and magical creatures and different magical artifacts. And like initially, they're learning spells that have all these words. But then when it actually gets down to it, they're just kind of going, they may not even be able to be saying things most of the time or doing special movements or anything. They're just pointing their wand and the power is coming out. Right. So there seems to be, so it seems even Harry Potter is this mix of like seemingly structured and limited. And also when you start actually taking it apart and looking at all the different types of magic and like, house elf magic versus human magic versus other magical creatures, etc. Like it's incredibly rich and complicated.
Mm.
And so, and even kids casting spells just when they're angry, like, before they even know any formal magic.
Yeah.
Right. So even all of those traditions seem to have in them something of the fact that the nature of magic can just be raw power, right?
Mhm.
It may not be bound up in ceremony or ritual. And you find that it's very common in a lot of the magical stories to find kids who are they're just doing something and
Mm.
they don't even know how they're doing it, right? So that's, yeah, you,
That's super. So do you find, so obviously we talked about different ways of delivering and whatnot. Is there like some sort of, I was gonna say, like, do you have like a go-to like spell or something like that? Is there something that you often use more frequently than others? Like, how do you go about your stuff? What is like a typical spell that you're using on a regular basis in terms of maybe what it does, like how you deliver it, what's the like idea behind it and whatnot? What like, is there any of those?
I have a few go-tos and they're going to sound super boring. So sorry for some people who are looking for a flashier answer, right? So my super boring, but I think really important spells are one, blessings.
Hmm.
So I do a lot of blessings. It's very common, particularly when walking out late at night. I have this little courtyard I can stand in to just send blessings in all directions, or when I'm sitting there at the end of the day, just blessing beings and categories of beings and dimensions and universes and times, and going through and just sort of sending the energy of well-wishing and the sense of blessing, the sense of helping, the sense of lending something beneficial to various categories of beings in a very generic way. And that's one of my sort of daily spells for just good mental habit, good magical citizenship, and because it just seems like an outrageously good idea. Another, you could call it something of a spell, though some people would call it meditation, is just calming down, just settling down. And plenty of people who have actually tried to do this will realize that it is something of a superpower to be able to just become incredibly quiet, to settle one's mind, to rest at ease in a relaxed posture.
And from there, just emanate power.
And literally just have that be the thing to do. And there's just like negative space in art is actually incredibly important.
Yeah.
You know, where the paint is not
100%.
is super important. In the same way in magic, where the force and the charge and the command and the structure is not, is also super important. There's a tremendous amount of power in the negative space of magic.
That's super.
And that's that settling and that spaciousness and that acceptance and that non-interference. That in and of itself is, I think, one of the more important spells to get good at.
Yeah. Almost like charging yourself in a weird way, like almost charging the chakras or something.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. I actually don't think of it as anything like that active. I think of it as becoming more transparent.
Oh, okay, cool.
Or just like not rippling the pond.
Yeah.
So for example, if you wanted a pond to be a mirror that you could see your reflection in very, very clearly, and if there were some ripples on the pond and your strategy was to pat down all of the ripples, so like you're going to try to pat all the ripples down so they're not rippling, well, that's just going to make the pond more ripply.
Yeah.
But sometimes the most important thing to do is just be super still and let the pond settle and see what clarity, wisdom, and magic can come out of that. And so those are sort of the two major spells that I do every day.
Nice.
So my reference point, because this is something that I just had not, I've been aware of magic and spells and some of the different segments of wizards and Wiccan and all this other stuff. I think my first real experience with that world was when we were on retreat at Kochi Stronghold. And I don't know if you remember, but we were on the deck. We were just having a bit of a conversation. And I don't even know how we got there, but you said, "Do you want to see something?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." And went into your house and you pulled out this case. And within the case, there was these sort of like velour covered things, right? And they were all sort of lined up, and you unfolded one of them. And there it was. There was a wand, and it had a certain style to it. It had a certain, a certain length to it, and it had a color and a material that was very specific. And then you pulled out another one, and that was entirely different. And you started talking through what these wands were. And I remember a couple of them. So there's one of them, I think you may have brought this one to the Bringarth retreat. It was kind of your Workaday wand. I think you talked about it as just like the, do you have them here? Okay. Okay. Let's see can you put that up a little closer to your camera? Because that would be really cool.
So beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
Look,
yeah.
So this is the Workaday wand. And it's sort of like when I spec'd it out with my wand maker, Kevin at Acme Wand Supply, a shameless plug for a beautiful craftsman. I spec'd this out to be something a down and out wizard would buy in a pawn shop that he could carry with him and just do general magic with, that he could drop on the ground, that wouldn't need a case, that would be strong and durable. And so if you notice, it's got like a dent in the tip. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, and it's sort of tarnished. It's just basic sterling silver, nothing fancy, but it does have this beautiful design to it. And it's not really a wand that's designed to do anything other than be a general working wand. So it doesn't have any real specific alignment to it, though I do think it has a certain earthiness to it. It's definitely like a down-to-earth wand. It's not a fancy high magic wand as these sorts of wands go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not nearly down-to-earth as like this one, which I picked up for $10, or sorry, I guess it was 10 pounds, 10 British pounds on the street from a guy who seemed like he was living rough and was just carving wands in the streets of Glastonbury to make a little bit of money. And apparently this is hawthorn, which is actually a very traditional wood to make a wand out of. And yeah, so he was carving these, and I bought it for 10 pounds, and he probably got to have a little bit of food for the day. And I got a very nice down-to-earth, you know, I would definitely say of the people sort of a wand. You know what I mean?
There was one that I remember. I don't know if you have it with you, but I remember it was like, it's like almost the sniper wand, the one-shot kill wand that, for good things and bad, like for like, it's just like, is that the one? Okay.
Yeah, this is the one.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is the first wand I ever bought. And when I was in this this arts and crafts store, which has all kinds of cool arts and things that people made in Boulder, Colorado, I was attracted to this wand case, and it had maybe 60 or 70 wands in it that had been made by Kevin, the wand maker of Acme Wand Supply. By the way, whose motto is, when it's just you and the Prince of Darkness, only an Acme will do.
Oh,
Anyway.
that's awesome. That's so awesome.
That should be in Harry Potter. That shop should be in Harry Potter.
Absolutely. Well, and so, and I looked at all the wands, and I actually got to try out a number of them because they let me open the case. And this was the wand I was drawn to, even though I very much think of it as a sniper wand. So this is a bullet tip. It's copper, snakewood, Gabon ebony, obsidian, and I just very much think of this as like, this is the dark sniper wand. It's kind of a one-trick pony. It's basically a wand to have and be tempted by and feel that temptation and not use. So it's almost like, yeah, this is the wand you never want to have to use at all. Because it's, you know, it's that. And
you sort of pick it up.
Yeah, to
feel
like
you kind of point it toward the area it might want to go in, and then you gracefully and respectfully put it back
respectfully put it away, almost as a magical act of the renunciation of violence and anger. But it lets you feel that thing, just to be honest about it, to be honest about the emotion. And then I also have another one. I don't know if I would have shown you, is this one. Let's see here. Hold on a second.
I remember a white one that you had. It was almost like a
we'll talk about the white one in a second. The white one was actually bought as a counterbalance to that one, which I call the dark one, or the sniper one. So this is actually like this is actually what's called a spike, and it's made by it's a WK2 spike, and it's made out of German tool steel, and this is sort of a handmade. It's just an iron spike actually, and it's I think if this is like a firm no, this is like, to the magical world, no means no, you know?
Yeah.
And this is like, you know, a hard piece of black iron, which is like, you know, with a nice sharp point on it to say, hey, back off. And if this is not enough, then if worse came to worse, there could be this one.
That sniper.
But I would definitely try loving kindness and firm boundaries before I would try, you know, weapons-based assault.
Negotiation a little bit before.
Right. Absolutely.
I have an interesting question for you, Daniel.
Yeah.
So I was gonna it's turned to kind of two questions. One, like based off of the Muggles concept in like Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find out you're magically able, or is everyone magically able from your opinionated stance? Like is it a certain group of people who are more magically inclined, or is it that everyone has the ability, you've just got to unlock it?
I think it is definitely shades of gray rather than dichotomous. So I think everyone to some degree has some magical something related to intuition, the energy putting into the world. And I think all of the energies and intentions we're putting out into the world from a certain point of view are all magic. Mm-hmm. Our emotions, our words, our images, the way we, and so the ethics of that means that we have to be responsible with what we do, with what we say, because we're all casting all the time from a certain point of view. But in terms of people who actively either end up living in a magical world where they're really understanding that, functionally to various degrees, or actively, understand and work with their power at that sort of magical level. There are definitely some people who do that obviously much more than others. And so while I wouldn't draw a hard line between muggles and witches and wizards, I would say that there are people who are more one side and people who are more on the other side with some crossover. And actually, most people are uneven in this. So take my father. My father is a guy who's very scientific, materialist, rationalist in most ways. You could think like 50s engineer with pocket protector and slide rule, and then he was a doctor. That's my dad. He's very old school. And yet he believes in ghosts, and he believes in souls. And, and so he has these selective magical beliefs that he's actually seen ghosts and seen some things that he thinks were related to ghosts. But that's basically all he does within the realm of magic. And then the rest of it, no. So he'd say fairies, no, of course not. Energy, spells, no. But ghosts, yeah. And so most people are actually not even they're unevenly muggle versus wizard, where you have other people who might be super into magic, but there's some magical things that they just wouldn't believe in or haven't experienced yet, or would say, oh, no, that's a bridge too far.
Yeah.
And then you might have other people who were not that wizardy who might actually selectively believe in that thing. And so most of our experiences, our abilities, and our appreciation of the degree to which this may or may not be a magical universe, and our tolerance for that varies a lot. So some people who are living in something like a magical universe really don't like that. They're not thriving in it. It's not making them happy. This is not a good time for them. They're not cool with it. And I know a number of people who have entered into magical territory who then went screaming back to more muggle-like ways of viewing the world because they were like, yeah, no. And I know other people who have spent a lot of time chasing magical experiences who haven't had that many. And so you see the whole range. Thoughts? What's your experience with this kind of stuff?
Dude, that's so I you know what? I really like that answer. I really like that answer because the truth is I've always wanted, for me, I've always felt more elementally, my whole mindset has always been with magic. If there was magic within me, it would be to do with the elements. I feel strongly based with the rage and the fire, and I feel, the earth and the groundingness, and, also the water tranquility, but also the power, and the winds smooth. I feel that, I really do. And not only that, but I feel way more connected to that when it's happening around me, when I'm in the ocean and I can feel its pull, and when I'm stood on top of a mountain or on an island or something, you feel that earth. And so I think, honestly, for me, I haven't had the magical experience that I would look for that would send me into a strong belief. But I'll tell you what, like I said earlier with karma, before we got on live, I also do see that there is stuff that happens that you just can't explain it sometimes. Also just how we interact with people. People always go, it's a really small world. And I go, no, it's not. There's 7 billion people on this planet. It's not a bloody small world. There's a lot of us in it. The fact that, for example, me and my girlfriend, we didn't know each other. We lived either sides of Bristol. So she lived on the top side and I lived on way down below Bristol, towns away. And actually in 2015, we both went to the same music festival and actually were in the same crowd, stood from where we both took photos, what looked like maybe 10 meters apart. And we didn't know each other. We both weren't ready to meet each other at that time. And now, years on, we met each other and we've talked about that experience, and we were it's crazy that we were both in a place, we were seeing other people that weren't good for us at the time, that we were in this darker place in our lives, and that actually that wasn't the time for us to meet, but we were this close. And I think for me, that's sometimes the magic in just how the universe works and how it I guess churns and fucking provides different things, but also things that are so consistent as well. It provides the change, but the consistency in such beautiful ways. So for me, I would say that's the magic that I've experienced so far. I want more. I'm fantasy all the way. Give me a freaking sword and horrible diseases, and I am ready. Send me to battle. I'm so there. But I just need the experience. What about you, Tom? Where are you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I think my experience with magic is mostly, and I'm not sure if this correlates, Daniel. You might have a thought on this, around what I would identify as on the insight path. You mentioned this stage called the A&P, the arising and passing away. So there's this. It almost feels like there's an unlocking of different stimuli that are coming into my perception. So whether it's, I've had probably 4 or 5 outer body experiences where, you know, I've literally had that generic definition of an outer body experience. And then I've had other experiences where the senses are doing things to such an extreme and to such an unexplainable degree that there's no way that you can put that in a, oh, okay, well, that's just sort of human calibrated experience. It's just way, 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 way beyond that. So those are mostly the real tangible, like, whether you want to call it magical, or I'm not even sure what to call it, but they feel like they were magical at the time, because it's hard to put words to them. And they happened. Like, they were as real as we're talking right now, for sure. So that what it is, that's, you know, that's sort of my experience with magic. But as far as, like, I'm just intrigued with the you know, the gear, because I do like tech. And you've got some serious tech, Daniel. So that does fascinate me. And just, like, I am fascinated by going away for like a weekend and getting like a cauldron. And, you know, I don't know if you throw frogs in there or whatever, or you just like stir some stuff up and you, like, you know, pull out like some scrolls. Don't do that to frogs. Don't do that to frogs. No, but like pulled out some scrolls and just like, yeah, just get into that space and see what happens. When I was younger, we used to do the Ouija board thing, and that was kind of creepy at times. You get that like that chill up your back when it did something, and you know,
Ouija boards are straight up creepy. There's a fact. Yeah,
exactly. I remember also with one of my buddies, we did this thing. Now, back in America, I don't know if this was something that you were familiar with, Daniel, when you were growing up, but there was a legend, the legend of Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden, there's a little saying, but I guess the upshot is I think she axed her parents to death, right? So it was like this horrific thing. So me and my friend, you know, my friend Blake, we were in my house. Now, we were probably about maybe about 9 years old, something like that. And we decided that we were going to invoke the spirit of Lizzie Borden. So each of us took turns going in my bathroom with the lights off and looking in the mirror and saying, "Who's afraid of Lizzie Borden?" 10 times if you could. Neither one of us could get to 10 times, right? Because you say, "Who's afraid of Lizzie Borden?" once, twice, 3 times, and pretty soon the mirror starts changing. And there's some, you know, like with that chill coming up your spine, some really, really scary, petrifying energy where you have to like scream and get out of the bathroom and be like, I got to 5 and I had to get out. I had to bail. So what is that? You know, that's those are real sensations. So I don't know if it's a mind manipulation or what it is, but so those are my experiences with.
Do you know what else I would say? Just based off of something you just said, Tom, and also I'll throw something up there. I'm gonna put quotations around it in a second.
I'm putting quotations around almost all of this right now.
But for me, something I was gonna say is there's something about also relinquishing your outer world judgment, because all of us in day-to-day life, I'm sure, Daniel, you maybe not in terms of insight stuff, I don't know, but for me at least, and I know for Tom and my friends and whatnot, there's this world of like, if you follow that path, if you like dive too deep in there, there's judgment with that. Now there's something really beautiful. I know I've
when you say judgment, what do you mean? Sorry to interrupt.
So yeah, totally. So like what I mean is, in terms of, there's a lot of misconceptions, like with magic, with things like that, about whether it's real or not, about whether it's something that is a mental health issue, or whether it's something, you know, all this kind of stuff that actually
that's a reasonable question, or 2 reasonable questions.
Has a lot of issues as well that have arisen for people for many, many years. People who have believed this and been deemed insane and put in asylums and tortured with lobotomies and electric shock therapy and awful stuff like that. So I think though there's also something really beautiful about relinquishing that, almost that fear of that judgment, the fear of, I think for me, that's what I would call it, is at least fear of being like, oh, someone's going to judge me. And I've done it a couple times with like LARPing events, things where, you know, you're live action role playing and you're dressed up and you're like in the character and you're like just going for it, you know, irregardless of who's there, who's looking. And also, I actually studied performing arts for a couple of years, and a big part of that is obviously embodying the character that you're playing in. No matter who is sat in front of you, you're going to act how that character would act, irregardless of whether they're a racist, who's sarcastic, someone who's, you know, unhealthy, someone who's from Boston, you know, whatever. You know, you're going to portray that character correctly. So I have to admit, I'm also curious, Tom, like you said, in terms of just going on one of these retreats and also just fully allowing myself to be like, cool, I'm here, I'm on board, let's just go for it. Like, take me in at the deep end, I'm ready for it. Like, that kind of thing is also something that I think for anyone who would be like unsure about this kind of stuff, that for me, I find is my biggest flaw in believing in religions, believing in magic, believing in that kind of stuff, is the ability to relinquish all of the worldly ego that we've built up over generations of bullcrap, I think. Because, you know, back in the day, alchemists weren't seen as crazy people. They were seen as the scientists. You know, like,
yeah, Newton was mostly an alchemist, and by the way, also stuff with gravity and calculus and whatnot. But yeah.
exactly. And not only that, he's part of the Rosicrucians, which is a whole secret society that existed in Scotland to do with magic and the forces of, like, this, like, that's what I mean is
Rosicrucians, yes.
yeah. Oh, sorry, did I pronounce it wrong? Sorry, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, those guys. And it's, I think, yeah, it's very interesting to me. I would love to enjoy that in a different way. Now, something else that I was going to say about the whole group and relinquishing those egos. If someone were to experience psychedelics, not saying I have, not saying I haven't, but if someone were to experience something like that, often when you do those kinds of things in groups, they say the experiences are very unifying. It allows you to be super self-deprecating, super honest to who you are in those moments, or at least experiences that I've heard of say that. And you know, I think in those moments, it's very much that you stop thinking about what is going on and the judgment that people have, and you start being real honest, like real honest about yourself and about what you're feeling and your beliefs and who you are in that moment. And I think that's a big one. Like, that's something else that I could imagine that. And people have also told me that one can see more magical things when in those states as well. And one would maybe tend to agree. And, you know, and I think honestly, it's definitely something that all of that unlocks. That's why people go on ayahuasca retreats. Like, there's a reason people go to shamans in bloody Peru to go drink poisonous liquid, you know, to experience this, to be able to feel that magic, to be able to understand themselves better and to be more honest with themselves, I think. And I think that actually segues into magic a lot more than the science community, the people who religious community, like all of it. They don't talk about that segue anywhere near enough, I think. But again, Colorado being the first place to actually start treating mental health issues with psilocybin and things like that is possibly one of the first steps in a movement towards the right direction, you know, in terms of that kind of stuff.
Well, so, you know, LSD was discovered in what, 1948 or some 50, I can't remember, somewhere back there. And through the 50s and 60s, actually, they did a bunch of treatments and therapies. They were sending this to psychiatrists and psychologists all over the world. And they were experimenting with this stuff until they finally shut it all down. And even today, there are other places that are doing it. So Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London are doing studies as well. So there is something of a psychedelic renaissance that's starting to happen. Yeah. In terms of more people doing this, but there was already the first wave that a lot of people have kind of forgotten about.
Yeah,
that already happened.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And yeah, again, things like, you know, also for me, I don't know, experiences I've had is it's helped me with my fear of the dark. When I was younger, I was I don't know if anyone else does this, anyone who's listening, anyone who listens. When you're at the bottom of a staircase and the light switch is at the bottom of the staircase and there's not one at the top of the staircase, and you hit the switch and sprint up the stairs as fast as you bloody can and room like it's like everything that matters. Like there's someone right on your heels. I used to be like that every time I turned off a light and there was a dark house. I used to also, I guess because of boarding school, because I lived with people my whole life and I'm an only child, having a room to myself and being alone in a room rather than a dorm with 4 other dudes was weird to me. Like that was scary. So I definitely see the help that I got from doing certain things has allowed me to in turn cure some of that stuff within me. So now, like, I just sit in the dark sometimes, like super weird, but I'm like, I really appreciate this space now, like for sure. And I think that stuff comes from an unlocking of your mind, a more like almost being like, cool, I'm just open to things now. Rather than going, the dark is scary, I went, why is the dark scary? And I sat there for a minute and I was like, it's not, it's interesting actually. And from there it was that was it, you know. But that's just on my end.
Very cool.
Does the cloak help in any way with the magic, or is that just aesthetic appreciation? Or are you just there during your cloak?
Well, so the cloak is lots of fun actually, and because I'm a geek, and I admit that freely, and I do like costumes and things like that. But okay, there is something about aesthetics that is super important that can't really be separated from magic. From a certain point of view, aesthetics kind of are magic, but from another point of view, aesthetics definitely help with magic. So an example I use all the time, imagine you're going to cast spell A, and it doesn't matter what spell A is. It could be any spell, but let's just say a specific spell called spell A.
Mm-hmm.
And you're standing on the top of a lone craggy mountain wearing a black cloak and black gloves with steel claws on the end of them, and you have a mask that has part of a human skull and big black bat ears, you know, and you have large black boots with spikes on the bottom, and there's lightning crashing all around, and you're holding a long black staff with a skull on top of it in one hand. It doesn't matter what spell A is.
Feels so much
in some ways, because whatever you're going to cast is going to be so highly impacted by those aesthetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? In the same way, if you took spell A and imagine you're like at Burning Man, you know, wearing a chicken suit with large clown shoes and flashing, you know, some LED hat with tinfoil, you know, with LEDs flashing on it or something, and you go to cast spell A, and you're holding a rubber chicken in your hand as you cast the spell.
Yeah.
Like, it's got to be a totally different thing, even if the spell you cast is the same.
Yeah, I can appreciate.
So aesthetics, it turns out, or if you're wearing like a white robe with a shaved head, sitting on a pale pink rug, you know, with gentle music playing in the background, you know, and subtle incense and water flowing nearby, you know, and a single flower in a vase or something, you know, and a chime somewhere off in the distance. Like that same spell A is going to have a totally different thing. So aesthetics, it turns out, are crucial to just the whole experience. And experience is kind of what this is about in a lot of ways, right? So
100%. Dude, fuck, man. If I ever make a sci-fi movie or a fantasy movie, you are designing the costumes. Jesus. Those descriptions were awesome. I was like, that wizard on a hill sounds like an absolute... No, yeah. That's like 100. And do you know what's interesting, Daniel? I think just talking about acting, again, just relating it to something that I can understand. With acting, it's all about embodying the character. It's speaking the truth. It's being true to who they are and speaking
Sure.
truth and being that truth. I think a big part of that is, you know, of course, you being in that moment, you having their clothes on, maybe if they're like muddy and maybe they're a poor person in the Victorian age or whatever, and they're muddy and torn trousers, and that allows you to feel that. Like it really
does.
Like, and it allows you to not only get into character as much, but believe. And again, this is to people who haven't studied acting, you're gonna think this sounds stupid, but really what it is believing you are that person in yourself, and like fully, but like people believe in God, like people believe in anything as strongly as they know that their hand is real. That's how you have to believe you're in that character. And I completely agree. If I'm stood in like my standard clothes, I'm Bodhi, irregardless of who I'm trying to act as. Like, I'm Bodhi. But the moment you give me the set, you give me the clothes, you give me the other actor talking to me in the same accent or in the same kind of way, if it's Shakespearean, I'm in. You've got me. I'm roped in. Like, I'm 100% committed to what we're doing. And I think that's a big part of it as well. And I can imagine, again, if you're not fully committed, then the spell's half-hearted, I can imagine as well. Like, you're not going to be fully, it's almost like, Ron's wand where it like breaks it and it blows back, because you're not to like the full like principle and the full ideology and all of that. And I can imagine that's probably something that inhibits a lot of people, probably myself included, when it comes to magic,
Yes, no question.
Yeah.
Makes me think a little bit of similar, that commitment to cosplay. So if you go to a Comic-Con and you see the huge investment in the detail of a Yu-Gi-Oh character, the hair and the costume and the shoes and like the colors and just the fine workmanship, and that person putting it on, that for them it's more than just getting dressed up for a comic festival. It's like a big thing, right? It's one of the highlights of the year for them that they've been working towards. And once they're there for it, they are embodying that, the character, the mannerisms, the movement, the words, all of those things. And it's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%.
And the funny thing is, like right now, a lot of people are probably being super turned off, or maybe some people are being turned off by this because they think, all the props or the whatever, it's materialist, it's bourgeois, it's showy, it's artificial, it's something. And yet it's hard not to be moved by like a Zen temple if you've been to Japan, where those aesthetics are so important to the magic of just the presence of being there that they create. Right?
100%. Yeah.
Right. And you can't help but miss that. Or even as gaudy or as tragic a waste of resources as some people might feel some of the great cathedrals in Europe are, you can't help but feel awe and majesty and reverence when you stand in one, if you just sit there and check out what this vibe is, even if you have some other dark reactions as well, which I can understand, right? Because maybe a lot of peasants died or were exploited or whatever to create that. And yet still something in that aesthetic is majestic. It does induce a feeling, a quality. And so aesthetics are important, as we all know, even if that aesthetic is the renunciation, even if your aesthetic was to wear a ripped rag of a robe and worn out sandals and wander with nothing into a forest. Well, that in of itself is an aesthetic and has a vibe and a quality to it, which may be beautiful in its own highly renunciate way. Or even if you were just wearing an ordinary, branded, orange t-shirt, which doesn't seem all that magically. And, so whatever we do has an effect. It conveys a message. It communicates something on a lot of levels to people. And that's important to recognize that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Tom, do you know what's interesting? So Daniel, I'll tell you a bit about me and Tom's just like progression through creative ideas, because we have a lot of them. It turns out we often sit and just go, oh, this would be a great idea, and then like stuff maybe happens, and other times it definitely doesn't. We just move on from the idea. But something that we often do is like we'll get involved in something and start looking at like Tom said, he's a gearhead. He loves, like when we started paintballing, it became like, cool, let's get a mask. Like, let's make sure that we can actually breathe, because the masks they provide you with fog up and you can't see and you can't breathe out of it. So let's get a mask and be committed to what we are doing. Like, it's almost, I would say, by purchasing in some ways things that allow you to be more involved with the activity, it almost enhances your commitment level. It shows your commitment level, and also to yourself, to other people, but also to yourself. You're like, I'm doing this. I have got this now. And irregardless of how I feel, I am doing this,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another big thing, is that often, people forget, like, cool, your suit, like you said, your suit is an aesthetic. When you go to your office work, just because your office isn't the most beautiful looking Zen temple, you might have the most Zen monks living in that office that we don't know about. But the truth is, unless that building looks like a temple, well, no one's going to guess that there's some monks living up in there. Like, that's just how it is, So, and it's something else that you mentioned, when you see these buildings of crazy grandeur, like when I recently went traveling, just two that I'll bring up was Akshardham in New Delhi in India, is massive Hindu temple. It's all entirely carved by hand. It's taken something like 3 million hours or like slaves or something to build this place, and it's still being built by generations of people whose granddad built Akshardham and father built Akshardham and son is building Akshardham and grandson will be building Akshardham. But I tell you what, when we were in, I've never been so like blown away by craftsmanship, by exquisite art, by beautiful story and reason why this building is here. And I like just absolutely jaw dropped at the sheer magnitude and beauty of this building and the space. And again, then completely polar opposite, you look at, I went to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and again, instead it looks rich. There's like gold everywhere, and it's the filigree and it's marble, and like, again, I was like, it's a completely different feeling, but man, is it magnificent in the exact same way that Akshardham was. Like, I'm still blown away by its magic, irregardless of how I feel about the church spending money on building this, like, irregardless of how I feel about Hindus forcing people to build temples for, like, I don't feel bad. Like, I feel bad about that kind of stuff, but I definitely don't feel bad looking at those buildings. I'm blown away by what they are. And in some ways, I would say some of those buildings, like the Taj Mahal, though, however, disappointed me massively. I was like, you're a beautiful, but it's very disappointing compared to some of the grandeur that really is out there, But I won't dive into that too much. Do you know what, something else I wanted to ask you, actually, Daniel, just in terms of magic and also meditation, as we're kind of crossing between the two. What's been the most, I was going to say, here's wrong wording. What's been the most strange experience was how I was going to put it. But what's been maybe the most unexpected or big experience that you've had with both meditation and magic?
Wow, big is a funny word. So it kind of depends on what you mean by big in terms of long-term impact, or just the moment itself was the most spectacular, or
let's go with spectacular. Let's go with most spectacular.
The most profound.
Ooh.
Yeah, so some of the most spectacular experiences I've had are where my body just exploded. That's just dramatic stuff. And I've had that happen a few times. So where literally it felt like my body just blew to fragments and the whole room just blew up to sparking confetti and then flew around, for some number of seconds and then reassembled itself. So
wow.
Can you give us some context on that? What was?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. There's a story I've told a lot, which is the first time it ever happened to me when I was a kid in a dream. But the second time it ever happened to me, I was actually sitting at Bhavana Society, and it was, I think, my first retreat, maybe first or second retreat there, which would have been in late 1996 after I'd gotten back from my year in India. And so Bhavana Society is a Sri Lankan meditation center in West Virginia. And at the time they hadn't built their main meditation hall yet. And so they had this one big building though that we were in. Well, it's not that big. And they were having a gathering where all these other famous and important monks were coming from other countries and from Washington, D.C. and from other places in the U.S. and had gathered there. And it was this very important day. And they had laid out all these cushions around for all these monks to file in and sit on. So a bunch of monks came. There was probably, 12 or 15 or something of these very important, esteemed Sri Lankan monks. And I was just sitting there, and they were starting to serve some food to the monks, and they would serve the monks food, and then we would get our food. And I was just sitting there while they were starting to serve the monks food, and all of a sudden, like, I just sort of closed my eyes to meditate for a second, and blam! like just boom, out of nowhere. And it's maybe day, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the retreat or something like that. And I had been, practicing all day, and like, like, and it was terrifying because I had no idea what my physical body had done. Like if I was like, had fallen on the floor, or if my body had maybe actually blown up, or what was going on. It was very frightening and disorienting. And the experience was of, imagine my body in the room just blowing to whirling fragments that sort of sparked all over the room, and kind of, and then kind of, and then the room and my body after a few seconds like reassembled with this like snapback. And then I was just sitting there buzzing like crazy, like ah, 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 ah. And then I looked around and nothing had happened. Like nobody had noticed anything weird with me. I obviously hadn't made any sounds or any weird movements. Nobody was looking at me. And I was like totally freaked out. And yet they were just still serving the monks food, and everything was fine, and the room was back to normal. And I was like, damn. Like, so that was, what is something I would call an arising and passing away. But that was a pretty darn dramatic experience, right? That's pretty big stuff, I would say. And then on the path of magic, like what's the most impressive thing that ever happened? Um, I think one of the ones that has had the most impact on me, what actually happened in my first fire casino retreat. And it was me and my friends Duncan and Florian, and all of us were experienced practitioners, and all of us had something of a magical background. And all of us, we all had robes when we were there. We all had, wands and things, and various, yeah, and we were, there were tarot cards and incense, and we were very much doing a magical, highly magical version of a fire casino retreat. And one of our things we were doing was, as our concentration got stronger, we were drawing pentagrams a lot in the air as just part of our daily practice. And if you do in a fire casino retreat, you're learning to see lights, and you can start to learn to actually see stuff when you draw it in the air. So you can start to go like, and you can start to initially feel like this sort of smear in space as you draw, the star and the circle with your finger or something. And then if you keep going, eventually you start to see stuff trailing off your fingers. Space sort of gets more syrupy and thick. And so we were, I was pretty powered up by this point. It was about a week into a 12-day retreat. And I had gotten so I could do this pretty well. And I could see the colors and see the symbols I was drawing hanging in the air. And usually I'd been working with purple or blue because those are some of the two colors I see the easiest. But I'd gotten what we call the extended colors, as sort of the more advanced colors. And I was starting to play around with the color amber, very much like my shirt is right now, or sort of a bright orangey color. And we had decided to get groceries. And by this point, we've all been practicing so much that we're all weirder than weird, right? Because when you do this, it's kind of like getting really high on psychedelics, just the super slow way. The entrance price is 50 to 100 hours rather than a few seconds to 30 minutes. And but so we're all pretty darn weird. And we decided all three of us needed to go in the taxi to go to the grocery store to get more onions and olive oil and garlic and lettuce and stuff, because we're all so bizarre at this point, and we didn't trust any of us to navigate in the ordinary world, right? Because we're sort of inducing such weird states. And as we're waiting for the taxi to come pick us up on this, it's probably 3:30 in the afternoon on a gray, sort of almost drizzly Scottish February. This tower of the Toria Bar, or the Tower of Halbar, where we decided to do this retreat, which is a medieval defense tower. So it was super, super Harry Potter geeking kind of at this point. And I'm just sort of drawing, I'm just practicing while I'm waiting for the taxi. And I draw this pentagram in the air. And Duncan looks over and says, "Hey, you just drew an amber pentagram in the air." And what was interesting is I had not told anybody I was working with the color amber.
Oh,
Like,
dope.
and so that he had seen, my finger move. So it wasn't weird that he could see it was a pentagram, but that he could see what color it was. My whole conception of what was possible on the magical and spiritual path changed in some way that day.
That's dope.
Right? I was like, okay, that is some stuff. And it was weird at the time. It didn't really hit me.
Mm.
Like instantly, I was like, well, yeah. And then I was like, and then it started to slowly dawn. Wait a second. Holy shit. I didn't say Ember. He knew it was Ember. Whoa, dude. And that's been kind of still hitting me ever since, right? I've never kind of gotten over that. Like, you can't unsee it once you've seen it, you know?
Yeah, was he being chill? Like, did he just lean over and like, yo, that's a great orange pentagram, man. I like that one. Nice one. And like,
yeah, basically. Yep. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks. And then I was like, wait, what?
How did you, yeah. Do you know what's interesting? You talk about like Fire Casino getting weird and you start being weirder. I'll talk about Tom's solo Fire Casino because interestingly, somewhere around day 10 or day 11, I got a phone call from Tom. And I answered the phone and I'm like, you're not meant to be calling anyone. I was like, I haven't spoken to you for ages. Why are you calling me? Like, you still got days left on your retreat. What's going on? And he's like, yo. Like, he's kind of whispering. He's like, yo. He's like, I think I'm losing it. He's like, this is crazy. I'm getting real strange over here, man. He's like, I'm starting to talk to myself. I noticed the other day, I was just talking to myself and I actually noticed it for the first time. And you sounded like super scatty. You're a bit like all over the place. And you're just like, I just needed to talk to someone to ground me. I just needed to like re-find myself in society and life. I was like, I'm here. I was like, it's all good. Everything's cool. You're all good. You're not losing it. I hope.
I remember that. I was like actually talking to Daniel as well during that retreat, but it was like, you know how you have your inside voice that just, it's just talking the whole time and it's commenting on things and it's thinking about things and it's actually like a voice, right? It's like words are formulating in your mind, in your head. That inside voice became my outside voice and I started questioning it. I was like saying something and then I would like comment and I'd say, dude, you just said that like out loud. That's why. There's no one here. Let's just bring that back in and let's go on with our day. And then and then it would happen again. And I'd say, stop it. Would you? And I'm having this conversation with myself. I'm saying, if Tracy walks in right now, like, this is bad. You have to like, let's bring it all back in. Let's tighten it up, Tom.
Realign everything.
But it's actually good to get out like way out to the, I don't know if it's good or not, but it's interesting to go out way out on the plank and see that you're out there and then be able to navigate yourself back in I think is a good discipline to have. Because then because you're going to go out on the plank again, whether it's meditation or it's psychedelics or whatever. And to be able to know that no matter what you're experiencing, that's pretty okay. That's part of this. That's part of the rules of your signing up for this, right? There's, the gambit of experiences is large and wide, right? And if you don't accept that, then you can get into some uncomfortable spaces. So it was nice to get into the edge, out into the deep water and then come back in again. But yeah, that was really funny.
Yeah, I just remember being like, putting the phone down and Nikki being like, you okay? You've got a weird look on your face. I was like, I don't know. I was like, I'm not sure if Tom's okay. I was like, I'm not sure if we need to go get him or not. I was like, that was a very interesting phone. But yeah, no, you battled through for like another, 5-6 days and got to like 15, 16 and then.
Yeah, it's 15 days or so. Yeah, there was, but that's part of it. I mean, we just were on a Fire Casino retreat and that is just part of the experience. There's one thing that's great about a community Fire Casino retreat is you can exchange those experiences. And oftentimes people are having very similar experiences right at the same time you are. So they're very much on a similar arc, but sometimes people are on different aspects of the experience. But what Daniel had said, and I'm sure is super sound advice. If you do any of this on your own, then you need to have that, that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire lifeline that you can reach out to and touch on a really regular basis, just to make sure, because sometimes you can get into a space, you don't even know you're in that space. And then if you're too far down into that space, then it's really tough to just navigate, to calibrate where the hell you are, what you're doing. And then to get back can be a little bit more complicated. So yeah, having those touchstones is really important.
You know what, Tom, after you just said that, kind of going full circle to what you kind of started your intro about what you do on a day-to-day basis, Daniel, and the project that you're working on at the moment in terms of getting straight help for people who are in emergency situations spiritually, as well as also helping people who have had weird meditation experiences that they're unsure about and all this kind of stuff. Tom told me a little bit about this project just while we were kind of lining up for Buzz, like, leave it, like, I'll get Daniel to divulge more about it, kind of thing. I find it very interesting. And again, something that I think is really important for people to hear is that there is a place where you can go if you are practicing this stuff. If you are, doing this kind of stuff regularly, there's a place that you can go to get advice. And Daniel and the Dharma Underground,
Overground.
Sorry, I literally know I was going to say Underground.
It started out actually as the Dharma Underground because I was the only one who was out at that point. Of about 35 people who were in the group, I was the only one who was public about the stuff, and everybody else was closeted because it was just too scary on the internet at that point. If you started talking about this stuff, people would just flame you off of forums like, Western Buddhist Sangha, or back in the day, the Tao Bums, or you tried to talk on some of these forums and they'd just be unbelievably mean to you. And so we decided to start a forum of our own, but it started out private, and it was the Dharma Underground. And then a bunch of people are like, well, screw it, we could have these conversations in public. And so we were like, well, what should we call it the same thing? And I was like, let's call it the Dharma Overground, right? So because we're above ground, right? We finally come out from the, and so that's how it got its name.
No, yeah. No, I literally knew that, but I don't know why. It just,
that's right.
Everything's underground. No, like, it's very rare you go, you know what? That band is overground.
Right, exactly.
Right now. But no, like, I think it's important for people to know that there is a space where you can talk about that kind of stuff, where you can get help. And Daniel is one of these people that's out there providing that. I'm sure there's a bunch of other people maybe in other sits in other places in the world, but like, that's out there for people that are needing it. And also, if just for advice in terms of the path to take, which way to go, like, if you're interested in it, again, great places to go check this kind of stuff out. I was going to actually ask Daniel, you said you had a little bit of belittling from like the internet community, from like your opinions and whatnot, which one is sucks for anyone, regardless of what that opinion is or what you're talking about. I was going to actually ask, what is your connection to like the strong Buddhist meditation world? I was going to even say, have you been recognized by like the Dalai Lama or anyone? Have you dealt? Are you like, have any of those people even given you the recognition that other people within the community of like what you set up are doing? Like, what's been your connection to obviously the strong core roots of meditation that came from Buddhism and like Hinduism and all that kind of stuff?
It's very complicated. So a lot of people like me exist in this sort of gray zone of territory where we may have certain meditative abilities or attainments or whatever. And all of us don't always use some of the traditional language. Some of the problem with some of the traditional language is, or define the traditional language the same way, which because some of the ideals presented in the traditions as their way of sort of advertising don't all necessarily perform exactly like they're supposed to. Like, there's one thing in one of the texts where, like, if you attain to a certain level of attainment, you have to ordain in the Theravada Buddhist order within a certain number of days. You will literally just physically die. Well, that's just not true. And so there are some of these. So when we use language that may in some ways be related or come from some of those traditions, but we redefine it with more modern performance tested definitions, that can cause some tension. So a lot of people like myself, also a lot of the traditions just say don't talk about this stuff openly, whereas we talk about this stuff openly and we're willing to disclose our experiences. And that's also against some of the aesthetics of some of the traditions. And then you have this funny thing of lay people and monastics. So for example, I had this weird thing that happened where, I was talking to a guy named Christopher Titmuss in 1999. We had this walk we went on at Gaia House, and I was asking him about teaching. And he said, well, a meditation teacher is someone who's taught a retreat solo. I was like, all right. And who had been asked to teach that retreat. Right. So some number of years later, I was actually asked to teach a retreat solo, and I did, and, taught a meditation retreat. And so from Christopher Titmuss's point of view, from the definition he gave me that day, would be that I was then a meditation teacher. Well, it's sort of a weird definition, right? I mean, what does that mean? Does that actually mean someone's good at this? Not necessarily. So it was sort of a strange thing. But And then he also started talking as if he was okay with me teaching. He said, when you teach, he said, charge a little something, which was weird coming from him because he did everything on donation. He said, people will take you more seriously. More people will show up. They'll get more out of it. You don't even have to keep the money. You can give it away to a charity or something, but charge a little something. You'll get more people and they'll pay more attention and practice better. I was like, huh, that's weird. I haven't actually done that either. I don't charge anything. So, does that mean I'm a meditation teacher or not from Christopher Titmus's point of view? Has he ever acknowledged me as a meditation teacher? I don't think so formally. And then there was another strange thing where I was on retreat with a guy named Sayadaw U Pandita Jr. to distinguish him from the older Sayadaw U Pandita who died a few years ago, who was the more famous one of the two, although both of them are absolutely great teachers. And I was hanging out with him and I started having these experiences, and there were only 3 of us there, and he started telling stories talking about arhats and what arhatship was and things like that. And when I told him that I was going to be teaching again, that I hadn't really taught in many years, he looked at me and said, good. And so that seemed to be in some ways an acknowledgement of a certain level of attainment and of authorization to teach. And yet, did he ever, we have a formal ceremony where he came out and acknowledged me as a lineage teacher by him? Nothing like that happened. And so you end up in these sort of gray zone situations where the monastics themselves have a sort of weird relationship to ordaining lay teachers, because that's not really wasn't what the tradition was until the last 20, 30 years or so, generally, with the rarest of exceptions, maybe 40 years. And that's not that long. And they're still pretty uncomfortable doing it. They still very much think of the monastics as the teachers. And I've never met or talked with the Dalai Lama or had any correspondence with him. And so you do find yourself in this sort of strange thing. And then there's the question of, is the authorization to teach, should it be based on intrinsic ability and knowledge? And then who verifies that when you can't really verify anybody's internal experience perfectly? Is it a social designation where someone who was given the power by someone who was given the power by someone, who just decided we're the people who have the power to authorize these things? Is it when you convince them, when you play enough politics or whatever, that you convince them that you're the teacher? Is that right? I don't know. And so a lot of us in the West at the moment are in this very sort of strange situation from a traditional point of view. And it's not well worked out. The monastics are not always comfortable with what we talk about. And so, for example, I just had, there was an article written by Bhikkhu Analayo that appeared in the Journal of Mindfulness, which says, all of my attainments are simply my own imagination. None of them could possibly be true. I know nothing about, the stages of insight or concentration. There's no way I've ever attained even to any jhana, and that I'm just purely delusional. And this is a guy who had never actually talked to me. He just read my book and decided that this was true. And that's in a major meditation journal. And so we're in and he's a monk, and obviously took some, I think, offense. Well, I talked to him for almost 2 hours between 2 different occasions, actually slightly over 2 hours. And clearly some of the ways I was using language and the ways I was using concepts in my relationship to authority and all of that were not entirely to his monastic liking, to put it very gently. So I can sort of understand why he wrote this pretty scathing hit piece about me. But it does highlight some of the strange tensions between us lay teachers and the traditionalists in the monastic order.
Dude, that is a badass answer, and I've come away with one strong conclusion. I'm not sure if you're going to understand this reference, Daniel, but Tom, you definitely are. Daniel is the Eddie Bravo of meditation world. So just to give you some reference points. So Eddie Bravo is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner who is I believe he's of some sort of Hispanic descent, but he's American born. And basically, he started practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu the traditional way, which is you wear a gi, so you wear the traditional uniform, you practice things like breathing techniques that are very much, that come down from the core lineage. So the guys who invented it, they're called the Gracies, the Gracie family. And what he did was he realized that there was a lot that they weren't accounting for. There was things that they weren't accounting for, and especially because his interest lied within mixed martial arts, where you don't wear clothes, you wear tight spandex shorts in a lot of cases. there's nothing to grab onto. And a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is based on like wrist collar control and like collar control and things like that. So what Bravo did is he actually beat one of the Gracies at a tournament using his own technique. He used a technique that he'd invented that was of his own creation, so that you can actually use it in street fights and in MMA fights when people are striking you as well. It gives you this whole new like wheelhouse to deal with striking while you're on the ground. The interesting thing is he is hated by, or not hated, he's not acknowledged by the core traditionalists. They're like, his way is not the way. But actually, when you look at the evolution now, his way is getting so much traction because of the new ways that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is being done within other sports such as MMA and things like that. People are starting to go, oh, his rubber guard actually makes a lot of sense. His half guard game is really prevalent. Like all this kind of stuff that he's built and he's created. And again, he's written books about it, and he's broken down the technique down to like micro movements and given it names, like you said, and all that kind of stuff. And also it lines up perfectly as well because he also believes in conspiracy theories. And you guys line up like very in terms of this outsider point of view, but also by the people who understand your outsider point of view, you're a master. Like you're a guru. You are this person who is seen as a higher being of knowledge that has provided something really beautiful. I think is also like that is provided art in a very beautiful way. And from what you just told me, there's so many similarities between those two stories in very different ways. One is violence and one is very much peace. You know, it's very interesting, Daniel. And honestly, I have to say, dude, this podcast has been amazing. I've gained so much respect for you. I've really enjoyed this. Like, regardless of whether we keep this going or whether you're like, I know Tom said you've got some time frames that you need to keep to or not. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, man. This has been absolutely awesome. You're an absolute badass, Daniel.
Actually, as far as I know, I can keep going, or we can stop now, whatever you like. But it's funny, the mixed martial arts metaphor came up because I've been using that one a lot lately for one of the studies I want to do. So as I think, as you say, mixed martial arts basically definitively showed that all of the traditional sort of fixed, strict styles that thought they were the one were all totally full of shit on that point. They were not the one, right? That someone who had some skillful, pragmatic blending of them who was good at it, could kick all of their asses, right? You needed some grappling, you needed good footwork, you needed some stuff from boxing, you definitely needed some kicking and some, Muay Thai kickboxing, something. And maybe you needed a few other cool surprise moves that somebody wasn't expecting, and something kind of, some mix of like a keto jujitsu, something, right? That you could use opponent's force against them or whatever. And if you didn't have all of those, then someone who had all of those is just going to take you to the mat.
Yeah.
Right. There's no question.
Yeah.
And so I think the same thing needs to happen with the meditation styles. So actually, one of the things when I dream of being able to, so in my dream universe, I have a conversation with an inspired philanthropist who has bazillions of dollars, who says, you're right, we really do need to figure out what the optimal spiritual technologies are. Let's bring the traditions in, let's study them and figure out what their cool aspects are. Let's actually performance test them against each other and figure out metrics that we can agree on, about clarity or balance or equanimity or, wisdom or life function or kindness or, traditional attainments, however you want to try to measure or describe those or whatever. We could have that discussion. But the point is, and see how everybody does, when they do their own style, just purely on their own, and measure those things all in the same way, so we can have comparative data, but follow these people long term, and then take the best of those, come up with some kind of hybrid, like the MMA version of meditation that looks at what we think are the most important elements that really seem to lead to the best outcomes for the most people. Put those together, and let's compare that fusion tradition to everybody else's traditional tradition. And I think what that's going to show, my hypothesis is that the fusion tradition, based on science and careful measurement and good outcomes, on average is going to beat any of the specific traditions that have gotten kind of ossified and formalized and aren't willing to expand and play quite as much. And so that, I think, really needs to happen in the world of meditation, because a lot of people are interested in real spiritual progress, in the benefits of these techniques and having minimal side effects and doing this quickly and on lower doses, right? That would be super cool. And I think that's actually where both science and the aesthetics of MMA can combine to give us something that would probably be a lot better than what any of us have now, because I don't think any of us have the optimal technique.
Oh, I can't even like preach and agree with you than something that I said to Tom and Tracy a few years ago. I read a book that was written by Dan Brown. I love Dan Brown. He's very like, oh, clues, you know. And he wrote an awesome book that was talking about how population is a problem and how like there's a problem with population growing and things like this. Was the main core like principle of the book. And I came away and I said to Tom and Tracy, I was like, there's things that we as an Earth need to fix before we can start making progress within society. Like, we've moved forward with technology, but we're now starting to stint out with technology and few other things because we're starting to clash as humans so much that we're stopping evolutionary progress because we're just dealing with stupid shit in the meantime. So like a thing I said to Tom is we need to have a unified currency that's worldwide, that releases all economic debt than where we're currently at. That means that all people can use one economic currency. At least these are my theories, my ideas, my hypothesis. And another one I said is a unified religion. Now, I use religion as a broad, as a very broad term, because it's something that I don't agree religion is the correct thing that it should be. But what you just said in terms of spiritual practice, what is the most beneficial spiritual practice that we as humans can do? That's what the whole world needs. And it needs to be one that is, that's what I mean, like acknowledged by all people, is, like you said, destroying traditional praying as Christians, as Muslims in the mosques, as meditation but also goes, when you combine these things, you become so much more powerful. When you do an aspect of this with an aspect of that and do that, suddenly you're so much more powerful. And so I guess one of my theories was always that we do need to unify as a population in terms of not belief system, but spiritual, like our spiritual issues that we have.
I hear you and understand the beauty of that aesthetic, and I totally get the spirit in which that is presented, and I hear you. And that there's also the side of me that recognizes that people are going to worship in their own way. They have different needs, they have different goals, different things resonate with their hearts, minds, and bodies. They're giving totally different intrinsic perspectives on the world and upbringings. And so I'm much more than wanting to try to enforce some kind of unification, want to provide good information that helps informed people make good choices based on their goals and where they're coming from and what resonates with them, that will hopefully lead to better outcomes. Yeah. So it's a really different kind of way of looking at the same kind of problem.
I guess in my world, I was thinking a utopian, like, cool, we're like, once the new solution is presented, everyone just accepts it, was more kind of my, not that everyone, again, would be able to do, like with religion, be able to go, cool, I am going to be the person who walks around with orange robes and a bald head and isn't going to be married or have sexual contact with people.
Orange robe, bald head.
I was thinking that earlier when we were talking about monks. I was like, damn, you're looking very modern monkly right now. Got the modern monk going on real hard.
Right.
Going away from tradition. You're like, I'm going to still wear the orange, but it's going to be a t-shirt and shorts. You're not even but no, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. In terms of like how it would actually work within society, you're 100% right. It's going to need to be a place where people get there by themselves. Anything enforced will never be something that works, because at the end of the day, we as humans are naturally built to resist people being like, this is what you should do. We're like, why? They're like, give me your reasons, and maybe I'll consider not doing it. But if I don't like your reasons, I'm still going to do it. So
yeah. And also people have totally different talents, different goals, different capabilities they've been given. It's like if I said everybody has to play guitar when maybe somebody's a really good clarinet player, but not a good guitar player or something, or that's just what they hear or want to do. right? So, but I would want people who, you know, are trying to play guitar or clarinet or whatever to have an opportunity to really play that well and know what is likely to lead to being a good guitar player or clarinet player, for example. And then you could just extrapolate that to religion.
Mm.
If these are your goals, these are your aesthetics, this is what you're trying to do, and this is what you hope to accomplish, maybe these are some of the things that would really help with that. And we have some data to show that if this is what you want to be able to do for yourself, and this is kind of who you are, because I think some of this tech is going to be custom, right? If this is what your talent, you know, your primary sense store is, and what you've got right now, and what you're caring about, then these are some really optimal ways maybe for you at this moment to go with. And then later on, you might need something totally different as you want to explore something else. So it's really much more about empowerment and optimization in some sort of data-driven way, rather than, I think a lot of people, they enter a tradition, and because the traditions tend to be very strongly, we are the tradition, then while you inherit the tradition's strengths, you also intrinsically inherit its weaknesses. And most traditions' biggest flaw is that they may have lost some of that spirit of, oh, of course, bring this in because that helps. And then there are other people that if you don't give them a lot of structure and they just want to do whatever they want, then they don't do as well, oddly enough. And some people really like structure and says, no, just this is the box. Oh, okay, I can stay in this box. And that's kind of their thing at that time. Okay, I don't want to rain on that parade either, necessarily.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I think there's an element of there's a discipline that is required for people to be able to break out of their own box. And so the discipline, we talked a little bit before the podcast started about how do we get out of this sort of tribal mentality that if you're in the tribe, you have to accept everything that constitutes that tribe. And not just that, but you have to reject other tribes, let's say their manifestos, their credos. And so a discipline that I think is really important, and that I've been trying to do it myself personally, even with American politics, is to find something that is wrong with your tribe, but also to find something that is right with the other tribe, to literally go through that discipline. So let's, you know, if we talk about liberals or Democrats and Republicans, how many people are ready to do that, to actually literally say, you know what, actually, I'm not comfortable with this backstory of Joe Biden. I don't care how it compares to Donald Trump's, you know, sordid past. That doesn't feel right to me. To be able to say that comfortably within your own tribe, I think is important. And also to be able to say, you know what, 99% of the stuff Trump is doing is you know, to some degree repulsive, not to some degree, I'm not for it. I don't, but you know, there's this one thing that I actually, you know, I think that he made some inroads with North Korea. I don't know what that is or not, but at least he had a conversation, right? To be able to have that discipline to do that, I think is really important, to start breaking out a little bit and just opening your minds a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that personally that that is easy to do, but for my example is I'll go to CNN, I'll go to Fox, I'll go to Politico, I'll go to the Drudge Report, and I'll get a perspective of everyone's own sort of little bubble, their own little crucible. And then I think that informs me a little bit about where I'm sitting. I think it's really important to do that. So that's an example of that discipline in the political world that could be brought into the spiritual world as well. And it's hard to do, and I don't know why we're not doing it. It's super important right now, especially in America's breaking because we can't do that.
Yeah. America's in disrepair right now because of it. And it's again, I would say there a lot of ego comes into that. Like, I would say that comes down to also, like you said, that pack mentality, that tribalism, that kind of, you know, you're one of us, and when you're one of us, you're one of us, and that's it. But also, I think it also comes down to the individual of ego within that as well. Like, you don't want to have to admit that you're wrong in a lot of cases. Like, I saw the most beautiful post the other day. It really warmed my heart. And it was at a rally, a Black Lives Matter rally somewhere in Texas. And there was a disabled white man holding a sign, and he's like, as part of the rally, he's joining the rally. And on his sign, it says, "I support you guys. I'm sorry I was so late to this movement. I'm sorry I didn't understand, but I'm here now, and that's what matters." And like something along those words. And I'm like, we need that. You need to have people who then because I know for a fact there's people that they'll read something and for a second they'll be like, oh, maybe I disagree with my own thoughts. And they'll be like, no, surely not. Scroll past. And I think that is a big one, is being able to go and something. I have to admit, I'm so lucky my girlfriend, and Tom, you've seen this like over the last 2 years, that she's opened me up to, is not doing that, not being that person who is like, I can't admit I'm wrong. It actually, especially with like my political opinions and things like that and opening up, man, I look back at 16-year-old me, I look back at 18-year-old me, I look back at 20-year-old me, I look back at 21-year-old me a couple of months ago, and I'm like, dude, you got some issues. And I'm sure that will continue throughout my life. But I also go, when I do see that issue, and it's something I've learned more recently, more because of my girlfriend and the way that she's presented things to me and whatnot, is that I have to go, I'm wrong. Literally, our first date, she made me vegan chili. She made me a vegan chili. And I'd never had any proper vegan food ever at this point. I was a meat eater, sworn meat and potatoes only, pretty much. And I was like, you're beautiful. I'm going to try your vegan food. Trust me, you're beautiful. I'm eating it. Regardless of whether I like it or not, I'm eating it. But what happened was we had a conversation about veganism. We had a conversation about her opinions on vegetarianism. And for the first time, she was the only person that presented me with an argument I couldn't argue against. I had no answer to. And so I sat there for a second and went, oh God, I'm a vegetarian now. I was like, if I don't have an answer to you about why I shouldn't, then the only answer is for me to shift my position and change. And that was the first big movement that I made. And for 21 years of eating meat, I now haven't eaten meat for 2 years. And I feel better for it. I'm happier ethically about it. Don't get me wrong, I miss steak because it tastes real good. But at the end of the day, I'm ethically happy with my decisions now. And for me, that's the big thing that people struggle with, is going, cool, when that argument gets presented that you have nothing to say against, you need to move. You don't need to stand and still fight. You need to move over somewhere else because that position isn't the right one anymore. And you know that. And people, like I said, they have that flick thought and then turn it off. I've seen that happen in person. I'm sure you guys have as well.
Super important. It's like, it's critical to the US right now. And I don't know, I hope that there is someone that can exemplify that and bring other people along in the spirit of that discipline. And my hope is that people are ready to do that, because it sucks being tribal. You're continually in conflict. You must be. There's no way that you can. I don't agree with, like, name one person in the world that I agree 100% of stuff that they have. So how can I agree with 100% of the list of stuff that this tribe says you have to sign on with? And I don't disagree 100% with anyone in the world. There's got to be something I agree with them about. So why do I have to denounce 100% of this other group? It's unrealistic. And so let's move from that, and let's get to a more realistic sort of acceptance of what feels right, being able to criticize our positions, being able to embrace some of those other positions, and formulate something that is better. And if we can't do that, man, I don't know.
Yeah, like, so even this monk that attacked me in a public journal and said I was delusional, in denial, dissociated, and just extremely wrong and disrespectful of the tradition, etc.
That guy alliteration.
Huh? What?
I said that guy enjoys alliteration. Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and we ended up having a conversation, and as part of the conversation, we got on another topic, which was actually the fact that the Pali Canon, which is the foundational texts of Theravada Buddhism, have never been fully translated into English. So unlike the Bible or the Quran or most other major world religious texts, the major foundational texts of old school Buddhism have never been fully translated into English. And we got into this really helpful conversation actually about how that might be accomplished, which is one of the other things I have an interest in. And I'm working to try to figure out how to get the last bits of it done. And so actually he was very helpful in that. So we, even though we may disagree on a lot of things, we had this moment where we both definitely agreed that this was something that needed to be accomplished. And he was very helpful to me in suggesting some things about how I might go about that and who I might talk to. So yeah, so, you know, there are these, you know, if you work with it and you spend enough time in dialogue with someone, you can figure out these places where, yes, there is some alignment and you can recognize each other's humanity and points of view. And so, yeah.
Yeah, 100%, dude. I 100% agree. And, you know, that's a big thing is anyone who's listening, you might not agree with the person sat across from you, but I tell you what, their boss is a dick to them. They were late for work. Their baby threw up on them. They stubbed their toe, and they got sick the other day, and they cut themselves cutting some onion, and they are you and human, and they do the same shit you do. They poop, they piss. They, you know, at the end of the day, they are a person as well, irregardless of whether you agree with someone or not. And that then comes down to, and I think something that, you know, you said, Daniel, and something that I'm, as an adult, beginning to appreciate a lot more than I did in my more formative years, is having conversations where no emotions get brought into it, and you can fully dissect a topic with pure logic and like and knowledge, rather than getting passionately like aggravated or passionately happy even about a conversational topic. I find I really enjoy times where I can have these conversations with, you know, my girlfriend about topics that maybe we didn't agree upon, and us have a clear path through it because we can just talk about it calmly. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't always happen. I got some Rummy Cub thrown at me the other day, which is a board game that we have in the UK. So it doesn't always happen. The truth is, at the end of the day, we all have moments where it's our job in these conversations as well. And I think this is important, to react appropriately. Like when someone presents something that you disagree with, the only job you have at that moment is to react appropriately to what they have said to you. If you get angry, if you get inflamed, if you start, you know, feeling all these emotions, suddenly your clear line of thought becomes a lot harder to explain, and it becomes a lot less prevalent in their eyes. They start seeing, they see the anger, and they can see that you're not thinking as clearly as you would be when you are of that clear mind. So I think that whole, when someone presents you with an argument that maybe you disagree with, reacting in a way that is going, and by appropriate reaction, I mean taking that on board, listening to it, considering it, and reacting by giving them either a counter opinion or an agreement of what they've said in a way that allows the conversation to continue and not be shut down due to emotions and feelings. And I think along with, you know, like you guys said, we've got to just pick bits from both. We've also got to be ready to go when someone does pick a bit at us, go, cool, I'm going to be chill about this, and we're going to deal with this, and we're going to talk about it. And once we're done talking about it, then I'll be emotional about it when you're out the room. You know, I'll go like be emotional elsewhere when it's not going to affect the dialogue that we're about to have about this. I fail at that all the time, though. I joked about Nikki throwing rubber cup at me. I fail at that all the time. There's like someone literally posted on Facebook today a meme about people with tattoos, and they were like, I don't speak sinner to people who come up to them with tattoos. And I was like, I turned to Nikki and I was like, how can someone post that? Are you going to tell me an Auschwitz like survivor with their code on their arm is a sinner? Like, what? You can't, like, that makes no sense. That, again, instantly passionate, instantly angry, instantly like, and that's not an appropriate reaction. My appropriate reaction was, fair enough, you might not consider tattoos as an appropriate thing to have in public because they originated from bad roots. Like, it came from bad roots originally in some cases. And has had a prevalent culture within gangs and prison and things like that. So I can understand why you might be misguided. But let me tell you a little bit about the history and the culture of the other side, where it's really beautiful, like in Tibet, where they do it with needles and like all this, you know. So again, that's an example of me just messing that up as well. And it's just how it is. Everyone does that. I'm sure you guys can both agree with that.
Completely. Yeah. That's still at 54, that's a big area of improvement, right? And so, and oftentimes it's in personal relationships, the people you know the best, getting out of that emotional space and really being fair in the conversation. Not and you usually with someone that you have a really good relationship, you can at least do it retrospectively, right? And you can pull it apart, and you can have a post-mortem on the conversation and talk about who was right and who was wrong and who was out of bounds and who wasn't. But to be able to do it in real time, to act appropriately in real time, is a whole other skill.
Mm-hmm.
That's really super fundamentally important for, I think, for your own well-being as well, because that energy that you get into in those moments is it's not a great energy, and you take it with you, and it takes a while for it to subside. Sometimes it lingers. It can linger for a day. It can linger through the night. You can still be dwelling on it the next day. And then oftentimes when you do have that conversation, it is dispersed pretty quickly. But to be able to not to have the skill to manage that is quite a skill to develop. Still working on it.
My wife and I have a trick we do when we need to discuss something serious or possibly tense or complicated, where we sit down and we formally do this thing with our phone timer, and we'll just set a 3-minute timer, and one person gets to talk for 3 minutes, which is actually a reasonable amount of time. You can actually say a lot in 3 minutes. And then if at the end of the 3 minutes, they obviously are not done, give them another 2 or 3 minutes or something. And then when they're done, the next person gets to talk for 3 minutes. And the other person just has to sit there and calmly listen. And the other person gets to be heard. And if you go back and forth with that, it's amazing how something in that time, and the fact that you're not just jumping in and your first thought and your reaction, you're cutting them off and they don't get to fully express their opinion or whatever it is, people very rapidly feel like they've really gotten their case out there and that they've really had time to go through what they need to go through. And we'll just do that until we're done. And it's interesting, it tends to do the reverse of what our conversations the other way do, whereas it rapidly becomes more tranquil, more calm, more thoughtful. Our responses are very, very clear, and there's that sense of calm, clear presence to it. Whereas if we don't do that, sometimes it can go another way. And I found this just really helpful. I don't know if anybody else would want to do that, but at least for the two of us, it really actually works well.
You know what? I was just thinking then, I would love to try that with Nick.
Oh, me too.
I'm literally just like, cool, I'm banking that for next time we talk about something serious. And just for something for you guys as well, like I've told Tom about this, on our end, we do something similar where when we're going to have a serious conversation, or it's one that we know the reaction may be of a negative impact, we start the conversation with context. This is why I'm saying this. This is the reason why I'm saying this. And just so you understand, there's no bad feelings behind this. I'm actually asking you a question so I can understand better. Here's what I'm going to say. And boom, then you give it to him. And we often find, again, by providing that context, it means that, again, you don't jump to a conclusion or you don't hop in because it's like, oh, I understand what you meant by that. And I actually get it now. So I can think about it for a couple minutes and go, actually, you know what? Yeah, okay, that's fair. Or yeah, here's my opinion on that kind of thing. So again, like that timer thing, I'm so using that. That's G.
I am too. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I'm gonna take it as well, Daniel. Even though we're contemporaries, I'm gonna steal that one as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great one to steal. I would. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, I can imagine. And like, again, also with relationships, it's even more important with someone who matters to you, with someone who you love. You know, a conversation me and Nick had the other day is, you know, in certain instances where you do get aggravated, where you do something, and we talked about with you and Mum the other day when we were at Walton Bay, Tom, you know, you often do things that you wouldn't do for a normal, like anyone else. You wouldn't treat any other person in your life in that way. But because this person is the person that you love and that you feel closer to and you feel like you can open up more and whatnot, you do things both positively and negatively more than you would for any other people. And it's about sometimes bringing that back to neutral and going, actually, with the negative stuff, you don't deserve any more negativity than anyone else simply because I love you. And with the positive stuff, I would say you deserve more love because I love you more than anyone else. You know, it's like you've got to find that weird balance between the two.
That's a great point.
You know, I think so we've kind of hit the 2-hour mark. This has been absolutely incredible, Daniel. Just so you know, Couple things just for you to know how awesome this is for us on our end. So I've just been watching the stats and keeping an eye on what's going on Facebook. We've had 6 followers, 6 people watching this whole time. So thank you for like the whole podcast. Thank you so much to those guys who have been watching this whole time. We also would like to say this is the longest podcast we've done yet. So this has been awesome. Really enjoyed it. And I would love, Daniel, actually, me and Tom said we'd love to have you on at a second point to maybe go over some conspiracy theories and maybe that rabbit hole with you, as well as also continuing to talk just generally as homies and as friends, and I guess as mentor and mentee for Tom and you, and in many different ways. But
yeah, Tom helps me out also as well, though. So he's given me advice on the professional project I'm working on and offered more advice. So it's a balanced relationship, I hope. Yeah.
Very much so. I would say this as well. There is I don't know how acknowledged it is out there in the community, but Daniel, you're an incredibly generous person with your time. And just when you described it, your daily routine, well, there's a huge block of your daily routine that is in service of other people. And as you mentioned, you don't ask for anything in return. You're just out there on a daily basis helping people. And I was one of those and am one of those. So from me personally, thank you for your role in our society. I really appreciate it. And may it continue. May we all benefit from your wise words. And
well, you're out there doing good as well, right? So you're helping to help people communicate better, to ground down, to be healthier, to have healthier relationships and corporations and practices and lives, right? So we're all out there just hopefully trying to make a difference, right? So,
you know what? And, I'll also echo what Tom said, because something that Tom can't really thank you for, but I can, is you've helped him more than anyone on this planet, any action, any passion he has ever had. Like your meditation path and the way that you have done things and the help you've actually provided directly to him has made such a big impact in our family, in the way my mother and my father react, who were at one point in a really bad place. And I'm sure, Tom, you won't mind me saying that, but everything now in my life, and me and Tom, also us doing this podcast, if you told 15-year-old me that I was going to do a podcast with my dad when I was 20, I literally would have told you to F off. Like, it was happening. And the leaps and bounds that Tom has made in his life that have then impacted our family life and our relationships with him, I also send gratitude to you for that massively. It means the world to me that he is the person that he is currently. And you're a big part of that journey, Daniel.
Well, also, I'm really, to be fair then, I'm also just pairing forward what a lot of people were kind enough to teach me freely, often asking for nothing or only asking for donations, but being fine with whatever I was able to give. The free teachings that I got, actually nobody ever charged me. Everybody who taught me for free and helped me. And I had a lot of help along the way from a whole lot of different sources and angles, not just formal meditation teachers, but a whole lot of mentors in my life, and my parents and everything, who are both very good, generous, kind people. And so I'm just trying to pay all that forward and try to follow the example of some really amazing people who were kind enough to help me out along the way. So
thanks, dude. And this has been amazing. I can't thank you enough. And we'll definitely have you back on. When season 2 comes around, you will definitely be in season 2. We need it.
It's been fun. It's been hugely fun.
Yeah. Right.
Thanks, Daniel.
I'm going to end the live stream. 1 second. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Homie and the Dude, episode 5. Wise and powerful Daniel Ingram. Thank you so much, everyone.
Subscribe, comment, follow, share, like, please. We will love to get other people like Daniel on the show, and for supporting our tech, certainly, and maybe making this even a more dynamic conversation in different ways. So thank you guys for supporting, and we will see you soon.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. We are no longer live. And